Hey learning enthusiasts, welcome. In this video, I'm going to explain several bits of general feedback that everybody needs to take into consideration as they continue to work on major essay project number 1. Now, you've heard me use the phrase, set yourself up for success, several times so far this semester. I want to take a moment to break down what I mean by that. So when we are setting ourselves up for success, what we are doing is we are putting in the necessary work to create the conditions needed in order for success to occur. If you don't put in the work to create those conditions, then you can't expect to meet success. You can't expect success to happen because the conditions are not right. But when we put in that work and try to create those conditions, then we are more likely to meet success in whatever it is that we are trying to accomplish. So whether that's getting a good night's rest, whether that's eating a eating a good meal to start your day, whether that's studying for an exam, whether that's making sure that you are cleaning your house, whatever it might be, you need to put in the work in order for success to occur. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen and things don't go the way as planned. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through these, and in some cases this might be review, but based on the number of views that some of my previous videos have received, I'm going to say that this is actually going to be the first time for most of you hearing this information. So please have a notebook open, make sure that you have a pen or a pencil ready to go. You're taking notes, all of the stuff you need to consider in order to create the conditions where success can occur, right? So all of these are the makings of a successful essay. So let's jump into this by first returning to the prompt for major essay project number 1. Okay. Now I want to just focus on a couple of the key aspects of the prompt, the main objective of what we are trying to accomplish in major essay project number 1. Okay. So the main objective is to analyze the speaker's argument and then assess how effective the speaker's presentation is based on your analysis. Now what that means is that we are analyzing the speaker's rhetorical choices, not the content of their speech. Okay, so you are not trying to prove or disprove the speaker, either right or wrong, whatever the case is. You're not trying to break their argument down and just explain it in greater detail so that your readers can understand the argument. What you are doing is analyzing the speaker's choices and how they get their point across effectively. So in other words, how ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos, those 4 rhetorical appeals or devices that we've been reading and learning about, how those 4 rhetorical devices are all working together in order to help create a successful speech. Now remember, ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos are always informing one another. In some instances, it's much easier to tell which one is taking the lead, but when we examine something more closely, we can see that they're all there. They're all present if the argument is successful, right? So we need to keep that in mind. So another parameter here, so with all of this in mind, note that you are not arguing whether or not you agree with the speaker. Rather, you are analyzing the speaker's presentation of their argument, and based on that analysis, arguing how effective or ineffective the speaker's presentation is. So in other words, that is going to be what your thesis is, the main argument you're trying to get across in your essay. Okay? Now some other parameters to keep in mind are down here. So let me go ahead and remind us of this. Rather than trying to analyze the speaker's presentation as a whole, meaning the entire presentation, so do not try to analyze the entire presentation, focus on a representative moment or key section of the TED Talk that demonstrates the main reason the presentation is effective or ineffective. So this moment in the TED Talk should be no more than a couple of minutes in length. Okay? So what you are trying to do is your whole argument is to express whether or not you think the TED Talk is effective overall, But you're not going to go in painstaking detail and analyze every little thing that the speaker does successfully or unsuccessfully in their TED Talk. No, instead you're going to choose one or two maximum, okay? No more than two. One or two moments in the TED Talk. And by moment, I mean a couple of minutes of speech length, okay? So one or two main examples that best demonstrate why the speaker's TED Talk is effective overall, okay? So I have an analogy I'd like to bring up here. If you are trying to demonstrate that you have a really funny friend, and so you're telling somebody else about how funny your friend is, in order to prove that your friend is funny, you're not going to go back and relate every single little funny thing that your friend said or did in order to prove your point that they are a funny person. No, instead you're going to pick one or two main examples that best demonstrate why that friend is funny, right? So keep that in mind. Think of this, think of that when you are analyzing your TED Talk. You're not trying to go through from start to finish, especially if you're going in chronological order, and demonstrating every little thing that the speaker does well to prove that you think their TED Talk is effective. No, you're just going to choose one or two key examples that best demonstrate that. And you're going to analyze those one or two examples in detail to see how ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos are all working together within that one or those two main examples. Okay, so we want to keep that in mind. That's really important. Something else to keep in mind is we do not want to just go through and analyze the rhetorical devices as separate, distinct elements. So we don't want to devote a section of our essay all to ethos, and then move on to a section of our essay that's all about pathos, and then to another section that's all about logos, and then finally all about kairos. We don't want to treat them as separate, distinct things, because, again, that is not how they work. They work all together. So it's important that we are talking about them all together, but instead demonstrating how they are at work in a single example. Okay? So we want to keep that in mind. Additionally, do not organize your essay by separating it into 4 sections. Okay, so this is important. We don't want to, again, organize our essay where there's a section all about ethos, and then a section all about logos, and a section all about pathos, and a section all about kairos. So we might be wondering, okay, well, how the heck do we go about doing this? So I've created a set of guidelines, things for you to aim for in the composition of your essay. So we need to consider all of these things that I'm going to go through in this guidelines list and apply them. This is the makings of a more successful essay. So again, set yourself up for success. So for the introduction of this essay, what you want to focus on is getting right to the point. And the point is the analysis of this TED Talk, okay? So we don't need to start off with some general introduction, some general statements about the topic that the speaker is discussing. We don't need to, have these grand preambles, things to like lure your reader in. All of that stuff is not necessary for this particular essay. So what you'd want to do is just introduce the TED Talk right from the beginning, okay? So in your introduction, you're going to want to provide a brief but detailed summary of the TED Talk. So this is approximately 250 words in length, maybe give or take a little bit, just depending. And you can break it into more than one paragraph. So if you need 2 paragraphs to create your whole introduction, that's great. You can do that. So what you should focus on in your summary is, so what is the speaker's overall message? What is the main point that their TED Talk focuses on? Okay, so establish that from the beginning. And then from there, provide the main supporting reasons the speaker has for this message. So you don't need to go through and find every single little detail. You don't need to provide every single little detail that the speaker talks about all at the beginning. That's probably too much detail for an overall summary, right? You want to hit the main points, the overall gist of what this TED Talk is focused on, right? So something to keep in mind, you want to envision members of your audience, meaning members of the people who are going to read your essay, you want to envision that some of them have never, ever, ever seen the TED Talk that you are analyzing. So with that in mind, what do those people need to know in order for this to make sense to them? They should be able to read your essay without having ever seen the TED Talk that you're analyzing and still have a pretty good sense of what's going on just based on how well you've summarized the TED Talk for them, right? So keep that in mind. That's very important. Now, something else to keep in mind in order to introduce this TED Talk, I want you all to practice this method of introduction because it is a very clean, neat, direct way of introducing a source to your readers. It gets right to the point. So I want you all to follow this for your very first sentence of your essay. Okay, so in, and then in quotation marks, you're going to put the title of the TED Talk. And then immediately following that, you're going to put the speaker's name. So in such and such TED Talk, so-and-so explains, argues, conveys, discusses, analyzes, whatever verb you think is most appropriate, that's up to you. But you should follow this pattern for the very first sentence of your essay, okay? And again, this is to practice this method of introduction. It's very important to be able to introduce a source like this, especially once we are working with multiple sources. We need to be able to introduce sources to our readers at various points throughout our essays. So this is a way to practice that. So I have an example here that you can follow. You can model yours after this. I'm using Tim Urban's TED Talk as my primary example here. Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator, Tim Urban delivers an engaging TED Talk where he analyzes and explains the inner workings of a procrastinator's mind. So that is my overall sort of like the one-sentence main summary of what the TED Talk is about. And then from there, I would go ahead and introduce some of his key supporting points. I might throw in a quotation in my introduction that kind of demonstrates one of those supporting points or examples. But again, this should be a general overview, brief but detailed summary, just the main points. So again, use this as your model. You notice that I have quotation marks surrounding my title. My comma is inside the quotation marks. I didn't put a comma over here. You notice I didn't put the word by, so I didn't say inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator by Tim Urban. I didn't say that. It's just Tim Urban delivers. So you could remove this part here. You can cut that out, and this part should make sense. Tim Urban delivers an engaging TED Talk, etc. Right? So that's kind of how it works grammatically. So just keep that in mind. Again, this is a very clean way of introducing your TED Talk. At the end of your introduction, so if that's one paragraph, at the end of that introduction paragraph, if it's two paragraphs, at the end of that second paragraph, you're going to include your two-part thesis statement. Okay, so if you don't know what a two-part thesis statement is, that means you didn't watch the lecture video that I posted in one of the previous models. So you're going to need to go back to that lecture video. It's called Two-Part Thesis Statements, and I break that down, what that means. We're striving to have a two-part thesis statement in this essay. Okay, so we're not going to just list out all our supporting points for why we think that TED Talk is effective, right? So go back to that video to make sure that you understand what a two-part thesis statement is. So it should be your claim about the effectiveness of the TED Talk with one overarching umbrella reason for why you think the TED Talk is effective. And again, you're not going to list out your supporting reasons, okay? So I have an example here. I have a basic example. Tim Urban's TED Talk is effective because of his impressive and humorous capability to play with his audience's expectations. So you notice I didn't list out a bunch of supporting reasons. I just have my one overall umbrella reason. So Tim Urban's TED Talk is effective. So that is my claim. That is what my whole essay is trying to demonstrate. Because, and then this is my overarching umbrella reason, because of his impressive and humorous capability to play with his audience's expectations. I have a few other examples in that two-part thesis statement lecture video, so using Tim Urban's TED Talk, so you can go and take a look at some different ways of approaching your thesis statement, but you're going to want to make sure that you review that. So the body of our essay, if we are challenged not to organize around the four rhetorical devices, meaning again, having a section all about ethos, section all about pathos, etc., then how should we organize our essay? Well, we're going to organize around the one or two key examples that you think best demonstrate why the TED Talk is effective, right? So I recommend organizing in order of significance or importance, right? So start off with maybe one example that really does demonstrate the effectiveness, but then follow it with an example that is an even better example. So you're building up to that, right? And keep in mind, I don't want you to equate these examples with paragraphs, all right? You can have as many paragraphs as you need to explain each of those examples, okay? So we want to keep that in mind, as many paragraphs as you need. So each example from the TED Talk should be only a matter of 1 to 3 minutes of speech time. Okay, so do not analyze the whole speech minute by minute. So do not start off with the beginning of the speech and then kind of just work your way through. And then. We want to avoid that. That is one of the characteristics of the listing effect, where we're just treating our points as disconnected items in a list. We want to avoid that. We want to treat our argument as a unified progression of ideas, where each point leads into the one that follows. Everything is a chain of meaning that is developing as we read on, right? So that's another reason to organize your examples, the two examples you focus on, in order of importance. So you're building up to that. So again, within each example, you're going to explain how ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos are all working together to make the example effective, okay? So how is each of those rhetorical devices informing the other three? They are always working together. Again, there are times where it's much easier to tell which one is taking the lead, but when you examine it more closely, you can tell that the other three are propping up that one taking the lead. So how exactly is that happening? How are they each informing the others? And again, remember, we are challenged to avoid using the words ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos in our essay. So do not use those words. So we need to then talk about those concepts without using their names. So we need to actually understand what each of those concepts means, right? In order to talk about what is ethos exactly? Okay, well, what is pathos exactly? What is logos? What is kairos? So do not use those 4 words in your essay. You're going to talk about them based on what the concepts are. And in order to do this successfully, you're going to need to include quotations from the TED Talk to support your analysis. And so I'm going to refer you back to that integrating quotations document that I introduced in one of the earlier modules. So if you didn't take a look at that, you're going to need to do so, because I break down the different considerations we need to keep in mind when we're integrating quotations into our writing. So that's very important. All right, so again, I want to stress the importance of organizing your essay by focusing on only maximum 2 key examples from the speech. You can use as many paragraphs as you need to break down those examples, but these are the parameters that you're going to want to follow, okay? For your conclusion, do not simply summarize your essay. That is a carryover of the 5-paragraph essay model, and again, we're moving beyond that model. So do not just summarize your essay. Don't insult your reader's intelligence. They remember what they just read. Instead, you can remind them of the main point you're trying to prove. But what an effective conclusion will do is address what we call the so what question. So in conversation, when we say, so what we mean is, why is this important? Why should I care? Right? So in your conclusion, you're going to want to underscore the significance of these ideas. Why should your readers care whether or not this speaker was successful? So this is an instance where you are probably going to comment on the content of the speaker's TED Talk, right? So commenting on the validity or merits of the argument itself, right? So going back to my example with Tim Urban, I think that these ideas matter. It matters whether or not Tim Urban gets these ideas across successfully, because what he's bringing up about long-term procrastination is very important. That means people are procrastinating on their dreams and goals for life, and they're not leading the the successful, meaningful lives that they want to, right? That's important. That has real human consequences. And so I might comment on that in my conclusion, in the concluding paragraph or two that I take to wrap it all up, okay? But that's what an effective conclusion will do. It will address the so what question, meaning it underscores the significance of these ideas. All right, so I have some other guidelines that you are going to need to apply to your writing, okay? Many of these are pretty, they're simple fixes, but they are going to do a lot for your credibility as a writer. Because we are in an academic setting, remember we are writing an essay in an academic setting, we need to keep that rhetorical situation in mind, right? So who is our audience? What is our purpose? How is the best, or what is the best way to get our purpose across to that audience? So I am your principal audience member, right? I'm the main reader that you are writing to or writing for, right? So I am a college English professor. I have certain expectations about what quality writing is, right? So we need to make sure that we are addressing that appropriately. And so a lot of this stuff is going to get to speak to that, okay? So one thing, a very easy thing that you can do, a very simple thing, is refer to the speaker by their last name only, not their first name only, okay? So I'm not going to call him Tim. I'm not going to say Tim explains. I'm going to call him Urban. So Urban explains. So I expect you to do the same in your writing. Use the speaker's last name when you are referring to them. You can use their first and last name together, Tim Urban, but don't just use their first name only, Tim, okay? The only time you can do that is if you know them personally, which I'm willing to bet we don't know these people personally. So something else is it's really important that we're providing context for our quotations and introducing those quotations with signal phrases, okay? So a signal phrase is a group of words that indicates that a quotation is coming. So I have some examples here where I provide context for the quotation, meaning I'm setting up for my reader when the quotation comes, what the quotation is referring to. Because again, some of my readers may not have seen the TED Talk, so if I'm just throwing a quotation in there without providing the context that surrounds that quotation, they're not going to know what it's referring to, right? So here, Urban concludes his speech by encouraging his audience to end their procrastination. It's a job that should probably start today. He then adds comedically, well, maybe not today. So here, this right here is considered my signal phrase. I'm attaching the quotation to my own writing, not just throwing it in there. I'm also providing context, so I'm saying that this quotation comes at the end of his speech. Urban concludes his speech. So that's some context there. I have another one here. Urban opens his speech by revealing, so in college I was a government major, which means I had to write a lot of papers. So here is my quotation, and here's the signal phrase that I'm using to introduce that quotation, right? I'm providing a little bit of context because I'm explaining that this is how Urban opens his speech, meaning it's the very first thing he utters once he takes the stage. So I'm giving that context to my readers. I'm also attaching the quotation to my own writing. I have another one here where I'm providing a lot more context for something and also doing a little bit of paraphrasing, meaning I'm explaining some of the stuff in my own words, which is important. Urban explains to the audience that he had an MRI lab scan his own brain and the brain of a proven non-procrastinator in hopes of gathering evidence to support his hypothesis that procrastinators and non-procrastinators have different brain chemistry. Right before he projects his images on the screen, he asks the audience to take a look carefully to see if you can notice a difference between the two brain scans. So here I'm blending quotation with paraphrasing, but I'm also setting up some context for this so the reader understands what these quotations are referring to, even if they've never seen the TED Talk, right? So keep that in mind. Something else that is important that will boost our credibility as writers. So even though we are literally students writing an essay for an English class, we want to hide that fact, okay? Keep that fact a secret from your readers, all right? That's going to boost your credibility. So avoid narrating your process. In other words, analysis. Of itself is not a negative occurrence. If used superfluously or haphazardly, it can detract from a writer's credibility. For major essay project number 1, do not use the first person. Now, I want to make it clear I'm not suggesting that we're not allowed to use the first person in our writing or whenever we write essays, but it really depends on your rhetorical situation. Okay, so for this essay, your rhetorical situation is probably better suited if you avoid using the first person. Okay, so I have some examples, some ineffective statements followed by more effective versions of those statements. Okay, so instead of saying something like, when I watched this TED Talk for the first time, say something like, upon first examination or viewing of this TED Talk. Right, so you're eliminating yourself from that statement and you're speaking in third person. It assumes an air of authority. It seems like you're a little bit more credible in this way instead of you just sort of talking about your initial reactions about a TED Talk, right? Another example, I chose this TED Talk because the speaker is engaging. So that's an ineffective statement, followed by a more effective version of that. What makes this presentation so effective is so-and-so's ability to engage his audience. Okay, that's removing the first person from there. I'm not narrating the process. I'm focused on the TED Talk, not on myself. Okay. Another example of an ineffective statement, when I watched this part of the speech, I was shocked by these statistics. Followed by a more effective version of that. At this moment in the speech, so-and-so provides some shocking statistics. So I'm speaking in third person. It assumes an air of more authority and credibility, so keep that in mind. Another one that this is something that will point out the fact that you're a student writing an essay. If you literally talk about the act of writing the essay itself, you want to avoid that. So don't say something like, as I write this essay. Instead, you could say something like, as we examine this speech more closely, kind of a better, more effective version of that, but you're kind of achieving the same purpose. It's just a little bit more credible. All right, so we want to keep that in mind. Avoid narrating your process, which means including yourself in your analysis. When I first saw that, when I reacted this way, I thought this. Avoid using the first person pronoun for this essay, and avoid pointing out that you are a student writing an essay for an English class. Keep those things a secret, okay? Something else that will help boost your credibility is to eliminate extraneous or superfluous first-person words and phrases. So this goes back to this statement here, do not use for first person. So eliminate things like I think, I feel, I believe. Eliminate words like personally. We can assume that these are your personal opinions because you're writing them in your essay, right? So you don't need to say those things. You don't need to say, in my opinion. You don't need to say, honestly. All of those things are extraneous. They don't, they're unnecessary. It's fluff. So you can remove that stuff and it will make your writing much stronger almost automatically. Okay, so I have an example here. I'm going to use an innocuous example. I think pineapple on pizza is delicious. Okay. Without the phrase I think, it reads much more authoritatively. Pineapple on pizza is delicious. Oh, okay, that person knows what they're talking about. Whereas up here, it's a little wishy-washy. I think pineapple on pizza is delicious. No, get rid of that. Pineapple on pizza is delicious. It's much stronger, much more authoritative. Credibility is boosted as a writer because it seems like you know what you're focused on, what your opinions are, right? Something else, we want to take care to eliminate overly conversational or informal language. Okay, so again, we want to keep our rhetorical situation in mind. You're not writing a letter to a friend, you're not just sending a quick text message to your bud, you're not even writing an email to your boss, right? You're writing an essay for an English class, that is true. Even though we're hiding that fact, we want to write in such a way that demands respect, right? We want to treat the ideas we're exploring in such a way that demands that they be treated seriously. So, pay attention to your rhetorical situation. You are writing an essay in an academic setting, not writing a casual message to a friend. You don't need to try to sound smart by using fancy language. That's not what I'm saying. And you certainly don't need to be stuffy or boring in your writing. I'm not saying that either. But you should do what you can to make sure your ideas are taken seriously. One of the most effective ways to do this is to elevate your diction above the conversational level. So don't treat it like you're just talking to your reader. You are writing an essay. Take care to eliminate any instances of text speak. So any sort of abbreviations or characteristics of how we write when we're sending a text message to a friend. So instead of saying, we want to spell out the word you, for example, Y-O-U, instead of saying you. We want to spell out the phrase going to instead of saying gonna, etc. So on, right? So these are instances where you can really do a lot for your writing if you're taking care to eliminate those things. So comb through your draft to make sure you're avoiding those things. Something else that will help your credibility is to use questions sparingly. Okay, so a well-placed rhetorical question can be very effective if deployed appropriately, but much of the time questions are superfluous and can even be annoying if used without discretion. So my suggestion to you is to omit the question and just provide us with the answer. There are other ways that you can be artful in your writing, but I suggest that you really use questions very, very, very sparingly, if at all. Okay. Now, for our similarity reports in Canvas, when you submit your drafts, we want to aim for a similarity report that's in the sweet spot between 18% and 25%. Okay, so let me go ahead and read this. Most of the similar content identified in your essay should be the quotations you've included from your TED Talk. So it's going to flag that as similar because it's found online. So that's fine. As long as you are integrating your quotations effectively, so making sure that you're using quotation marks when it is the direct wording, making sure that you're indicating who the speaker is by including their name. All of those things, if you're doing that, then you should be in good shape. If your similarity report is higher than 25%, that means that over a quarter of the material in your essay comes from elsewhere. We're interested in reading your analysis. If you find that your similarity report is higher than 25%, what you can do is you can paraphrase some of the quotations that you've included. So maybe you want to just restate the idea in your own words, how you would write it. Or you can also increase the volume of your voice by adding more commentary or explanation to the quotations, right? You do not want to let quotations speak for themselves. You want to offer your analysis, your explanation, your commentary, break that quotation down for your readers. Add more of your own voice to your writing, and that should reduce the similarity report. Okay, so again, set yourself up for success. These are the makings of a more successful essay, particularly the stuff up here. So if you're not doing your best to implement all of these things into your draft, then you are not adequately setting yourself up for success, right? You need to put in the work necessary to create the conditions where success can thrive. If you don't do that, you can't expect success. I am here for you, y'all. You can send me a message on Canvas if you have any questions. I'm happy to try to address them as best I can, talk with you about your ideas. But please make sure that you are implementing all of these things into your drafts because they're the makings of a more successful essay. All right, everybody, I'm really looking forward to seeing how you put all this stuff together, seeing how your polished drafts turn out. I'll catch you all later.